I said last time that I was going to dive back into the material is that concerns Saint Germain directly, but I thought there's just a little more in this in Transylvanian Sunrise that I think is important, particularly the idea that the dark side of Freemasonry is able to inculcate into its members a kind of almost demonic tenacity due to groupthink and the use of oaths and rituals, whereby the free will of the individual is dismantled, and in its place is a complete subjugation of the initiate into a system that harnesses that person's energies toward an aim that person had no real part in creating, and but because of the fear factor involved, that each member who is initiated in this way is, I suppose you could say, in a spiritual sense, is weaponized. So why go into that? Well, my hypothesis now is that Saint-Germain was an agent of the good side of Freemasonry. And that, to me, could be easily summed up by saying that he served humanity and was an agent of freedom. So I'm just going to read a little bit more, and then let's transition. Let's go into something that pertains to him directly. I just wanted to set the stage because part of me, I feel it's important to characterize or examine the world as it is, and look at reasons behind what we've been seeing. Or rather, it's been going on for so long that actually very few people can actually see it, because for most people, I would say for 99% of the population, it's just so ubiquitous that it's invisible. But the recent events, I think, have caused people to at least try to look more deeply, and concepts like the Matrix being circulated long enough causes people to reflect on exactly what is meant by the Matrix, what is exactly meant by the red pill. And so, because I believe that this whole conflict between light and dark, between good and evil, is reaching a point of transition, a tipping point, that I think all of us can play a role in it on the spiritual level. And I don't mean that there is a spiritual level that's somehow isolated, or that one can separate or partition off from direct action, from making a difference in the political sphere, or in the cause of development, or just being a good influence, but that it begins on the spiritual level, by raising one's vibrational level. One then becomes more capable and more prone and more potent, more prone to right action. And as one continues to raise one's vibrational levels, one's actions become more powerful. All of this is pretty new to me, so I have to qualify it by saying that this is conjecture, and I'm going with it myself. And as I said early on in this long meditation on the life of Saint Germain, the purpose of it was my own self-development and also to be an aid or some kind of resource for anyone else who might be listening and might take up the call or tune in to what I might be willing to entertain the idea that Saint Germain has an influence that persists. I can't say for sure one way or another to what extent he may be still alive or exerting some kind of influence from somewhere. But, again, whatever you think of Saint Germain, you'll learn a little history, you'll hopefully learn something about yourself. And the whole purpose really was to perhaps inspire people during this very strange time that we're living through, to understand that one is always free to upgrade oneself, and that the process of evolving oneself and growing and progressing is infinite, and that perhaps as we go through a very strange Alice in Wonderland period, this is a perfect time to sort of reassess our priorities and put personal development uppermost. So let's keep going, This is admittedly, if this were, first of all, I'm not an expert at all. This is just purely an exploration. And so it's going to be a bit, it's kind of a windy road, I admit, but let's stay on track just based on what we were doing last time, and I'll try to steer it in the direction that feels right for me, and of course I'm open to any suggestions. We ended last time on the section where he was talking about Masonic symbols. I often marvel, although I haven't reached any conclusions, about symbols and their amazing power. There was someone, maybe it was Mark Passio, or he was quoting someone. He said, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures. And indeed, as I get older, I am more and more inclined to take symbols very seriously. So last time it was Cesar Brad, the hero of this book, talking to his appointed scribe, writer, interpreter, not interpreter, but a writer that he tapped to bring his story to light and to share it with the world. Radu Cinamar, Romanian writer. This takes place in Romania. Again, this is from Transylvanian Sunrise. So he's saying, Cesar Brad is saying, there are indeed some Masonic symbols that are very well known, such as the compass and the trowel. Others, however, are much more occult. The all-seeing eye, not accidentally. I won't go into that, but, there's certainly a lot out there on the all-seeing eye, and it's in your face all the time. In today's world, in 2020 of today, but back in 2003, it was not not everywhere the way it is now. Next to symbols, the Mason symbols are very important for the followers of the Masonic lodges, but these are less well known by everyone. For example, on the same $1 bill is the Latin motto E pluribus unum, which in a rough translation means chaos to order. Now this is incorrect. And it's a bit worrisome that such a terrible error was allowed to get through the translation process and to be published here, because it throws everything into doubt and casts, I think, certain shade on it. It's a shame. I'd like to see the original transcript. I would think that Cesar Brad, being Romanian, would know that e pluribus unum means out of many, one, and that ordo ab chao is the Latin for out of order, out of chaos, order, which there are two interpretations of that. One of them is I think is kind of deliberately benign, sort of saying, well, this is just how life is, terrible things happen accidentally, and then you rebuild out of that, and that's how you move forward. But there is a perhaps more Machiavellian or more realistic interpretation, I think, which is that the chaos is engineered, it's carried out, it's an operation, and to the degree it is successful, to the degree that it actually spreads and creates chaos in society, then the same people who created the chaos are able to come in with a solution and impose a new order. We all know that this was the talk in the lead up to the post 9/11 world, which was we need a new enemy, we need to engineer, and it would be good for us to begin a war of civilizations with Islam, and we need to, how are we going to do that? And then you have 9/11. So that to me is a more correct interpretation of ordo ab chao. But anyway, yeah, it bothers me a little bit, this mistake in the text, which is pretty bad in my view. If you coherently analyze the way things are going now in the world, and also in Romania from the social, economical, and political perspective, you will easily realize how this chaos is structured to gradually ensure the setting up of the New World Order that is not called the New Masonic Order, just so the ignorant ones don't know who its actual creators are, but only the New Order. I heard a rumor the other day that they're actually changing it to the New Liberal World Order, which is so Orwellian, because there's nothing liberal about what one sees, the evidence of this New World Order. It's really tyrannical. There's nothing remotely liberal. Liberal meaning that which befits a free society. We certainly don't see that. We see top-down imposition on individual freedoms with using the appalling use of force and deception and coercion. So there you have it. The absolute turning upside down of the word liberal to make it more palatable to sell it, I suppose, because the sheep see liberal as cool and hip and free and open. So let's run with it. Shameful, because I did grow up. I suppose I grew up. My household was very much on the left, and freedom of speech and anti-war and all and also not just tolerance, but genuine goodwill toward people who stand outside the kind of conformity that we saw, the kind of extreme conformity that came about after World War II, certainly into the 50s. My parents were a generation that broke away from that. And so I was lucky enough to be instilled with what I would call true liberal values. So that's why I'm very disturbed by what we're seeing these days. Okay. Another principle strictly carried out by Masons, especially within the lodges and their brotherhood, is the imperative, all for one and one for all. It may seem strange, but you must know that their obedience confers upon them a state of unity, as well as a considerable force and tenacity. From this point of view, I must confess that if the people of Romania or any other part of the world would demonstrate the same tenacity, the same force of action, the same systematic connection as the Masons, but of course directed toward profoundly beneficial and positive ends, then the present situation of mankind, or at least a part of it, would be completely different. And this next aspect is also very important. While the ordinary human being always has the possibility to choose, there are profound demonic forces behind the Masons that imprint in the members of their organization a certain state of terror, an attitude of subordination like in the army. This makes the ones who act in these Masonic groups or lodges to be almost inexorable in their decisions. Things just kind of roll forward. Unstoppable, implacable. A Masonic order is not to be discussed, because in the initiatory moment when they are accepted into the organization, they are sworn to a terrible oath, and they go through a perverse ritual in which they oblige themselves to total surrender and obedience, accepting to be killed if they act otherwise. This means that beyond their actions in the physical plane, the Masons also apply... Oh wait, let's see. Now it's Radu Chinamar talking. This means that beyond their actions in the physical plane, the Masons also apply certain occult methods and rituals that are deeply malevolent, I ascertained. These are part and parcel of their practical and ideological system, but only from a certain level upwards. So you can understand better, the malevolent rituals and invocations are realized only by those members that reach a certain very high rank or position in the lodge they belong to. Usually the information that is released about the Masons does not contain the subtle or paranormal impact that the huge sphere of influence of this malevolent group has upon those who join it. That's exactly why, for the common people that find out only certain truths about it, the Masons are nothing else than a group, often resembling a gang of crooks. Still, joining the Masons has strong occult negative effects that put one in resonance with the distinctive features of that group. In fact, the merging of all these energies as a result of one's adherence to a Masonic group will create such profound negative changes in a person's aura that comparing it to his previous state will force him to admit the malevolent nature of Masonry's orientation. How do you then explain their amazing power in contemporary life's basic fields like economics and politics, I asked. Truly, the Masons are now one of the most powerful groups. I could even say that it is the only occult group with political purposes. All these other groups or occult organizations usually have spiritual purposes. They don't strive to make political statements because, in their view, these things are ephemeral. However, where the Masons are, I think he means temporal. However, where the Masons are concerned, the situation is different. They insist greatly on this political involvement in order to make those who join them drop at this level in connection with the influence and power they have upon a large number of society, a large number of people. What is that? Well, let's just move on. They insist greatly on this political involvement in order to make those who join them drop at this level in connection with the influence and power they have upon a large number of people. I think something wrong with the translation here. Obviously. This demonic action leads to so-called soul breaking for those who enter their groups. It's kind of like mind breaking. It's kind of like, MK Ultra, to break people's minds, to shatter the individual. And this is something they do in super soldier programs as well. Anyway, it is natural for the Masons to act in this way because the occult initiations they offer do not pursue any development or sensibility in the soul of the one joining. It's denial of the soul. They do not pursue any development. So this is one aspect when I would say the spirit suggested by this characterization of this negative side of Freemasonry, definitely direct odds with what we understand about Saint-Germain. If the soul of that specific person would awaken, he could not then be manipulated and made to realize numerous actions that are obviously malevolent and demonic anymore. From this point of view, feelings like kindness, affection, and compassion are completely unknown to a Mason because with these feelings he could not obey all orders. Through the occult initiation ritual, the one that enters the organization is deprived of all these feelings because he then does a sort of a pact with demonic forces. Unfortunately, in most of the cases, the being is not even aware of this terrible setback that is taking place. A setback, on the spiritual level. What a shame. Where the Masonic elite promote a member of the lodge to a very high or important position within the organization, it has certain subtle criteria that suggest if that person has changed enough in the demonic direction. I myself later found out for myself after my first meeting with Signore Massini most of these truths about the Masons. It is almost unbelievable how much human misery can be at the top of the hierarchical pyramid, but everything is gilded and made to look shiny and noble through their extraordinary wealth, connections, influence, and control all over the world. I'm laughing because I got a message from someone on Instagram saying, "Do you want to be a member of the Illuminati? Just call this number. You will have protection in the courts. You will have connections with powerful people. No one will ever mess with you ever again. You'll be able to clear the way to your own success." And interestingly, I had to look at the photos of this con man, whoever it was. Perhaps they stole the photos, but it's like a very large man in expensive suits, with meeting with Freemasons and traveling, and obviously he looks very well off. And I'm trying to think how I should play with this person, what I should say, because it's too good. It's obviously it's a scam, and I just want to. It's fun to mess with scammers, so I'm just leaving the message in there thinking, what would be the coolest, funnest way to play with this person's mind? Anyway. regarding the fact that they are experts in testing those who come to them or those they promote into very high positions in their organization, I was naive to believe I had managed to deceive Mazzini, making him think I had accepted his proposal of adhesion and cooperation without any further inquiries. The old man was very canny. Even the amazing information he let me know regarding their methods and actions were part of the test, or better said, trap they were preparing for me. Most probably he already knew well before meeting me that I will never accept his proposal. Indeed, I wasn't anywhere near their soul-rotted standards, and I already had a strong enough spiritual force and discernment to realize the awful truth about them without being tempted by their offerings. Nevertheless, as you will be able to see, the card they were playing with me was far more important, and they had to take the risk. But they did it in a very complex way. Okay, I think that's enough. Let's see. Okay, Masons are no fools. On the contrary, they possess great intelligence, but it has a perverse and even demonic nature because they use it in fulfilling their malevolent plans. So it makes me think back to the French Revolution, and despite Saint-Germain's initiative and despite his warnings and his activism, he was not able to overcome the dark forces, and I think probably because he was greatly outnumbered and because of the tenacity and the sheer malevolence that's generated by people who are inducted into such a rigid hierarchy and are governed by a kind of maniacal fear. It's kind of a they are themselves terrorized by their own devices. So that's part of why I did such extensive reading. Because this book is very current, because now 17 years later, we still are not privy. The secrets in Montebucege that Signore Mazzini was interested in securing for his own organization, or at least preventing the people of planet Earth from gaining access to the incredible secrets contained therein. And when you look at the situation now, it's almost like only such a revelation could possibly provide enough of a flash of light, I mean on the spiritual energetic level, to resolve this for what has been a very unequal contest between the light and the dark. The dark has been in control for, according to my own research, the dark has been in control of human beings for perhaps 3,000 years. And so I know in the greater scheme of things, that's not so long. But on the other hand, it's long enough to have made the deceptive blueprint from which 99% of the population live their lives and believe and formulate their beliefs about themselves and the cosmos are generated from essentially a dark principle that has, I think, as its main objective the elimination of free will. And so let's leave it there. I think that's enough. But I encourage everyone to download this book and to look into what's available out there on YouTube. It's absolutely fascinating what they're. The more you read about it, the more fascinated you'll be with what these secrets could be in Muncie Bucej in Romania. So we're about halfway in to the video, and I want to introduce people to quite a well-known book about Saint-Germain. Marquis Saint-Germain, der Wundermann, Comte de St. The Secret of Kings by Copper Oakley, dedicated to the great soul who in the struggles of the 18th century worked, suffered, and triumphed. Well, the exact nature of his triumph may be something that can't really be decided in terms of the tragic events of the 18th century, unless you're open to the idea that he was or embodied the spiritual impulse behind the American Revolution. In which case, yes, it's important to have lit that flame of freedom, although we still, even in 2020, we're struggling to understand exactly the nature and to appreciate the full value of it and to serve it and to add to it, to amplify it, to extend it, to expand. And we still aren't clear as to its full potential because it is inexhaustible, it is infinite. So, but this book, this first part says that this book originally published in 1912 by Ars Regia of Milan, reissued because it has become so rare as to reach prohibitive prices, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of mistakes in it. The result is that it teems with errors of spelling and punctuation, yes, and sometimes quaint English. Well, that's not such a big problem. It's more the mistakes in spelling and etc. But we've been able to, by careful workmanship, to improve on them, but we disclaim any idea of there being as satisfactory as if we could have worked from the original documents, pictures, and photographs. Okay, so expect a lot of mistakes here, and I will try to make it as understandable as possible. Annie Besant, I'd rather not read her forward. I'm not inclined to give much credence to Annie Besant in any respect yet. But the preface, I think, is good. I have thought it better in preparing the first part of the monograph on the life of the Comte de Saint to reprint the articles which were published in 1897 in the Theosophical Review with some additional matter rather than rewrite an entirely new book, since to many persons those magazine articles are not easily accessible. Perhaps some critics may think that there is too much quoted matter. This I have done on purpose in order that the opinions of those persons who were in actual contact with the Comte de Saint may be considered rather than my own. In the 18th century, everyone of an education kept a diary, and in these diaries we get a living picture of the period. This is very decidedly in the case of the memoirs of Madame Dadema. I had mispronounced this first because the first thing I was reading from didn't have an accent over the E, so I was saying Dadmar. It's Dadema. It has been suggested by one writer in the 19th century that these memoirs are apocryphal. I do not think so. Well, I mean, I'm not sure that this book puts all the doubts to rest. Some of these accounts may be slightly apocryphal. We just don't know. I do not think so, as the present Comtesse d'Adhémar informed me that they have documents about the Comte de St in their possession. I would love to see those. I would love to get access to those. In the second part of this study, there is much additional political material. Unfortunately, in the English Record Office, all the ciphers which were between the written lines were carefully erased before the papers were consigned to me. Evidently, there was some mystery about this political work, which is even now not to be made public. I take this opportunity of thanking the many friends, and especially Monsieur G. Mallet, who have helped me with the arduous work of copying and translating. Without their valuable work, this study could not have been printed. I am now collecting more material which will form the second part of this monograph when complete. I read this a few times, but last night I said, oh my good, second part. My goodness, second part. I have to look for it. I don't know if she ever got around to it. Isabel Cooper Oakley, 1911. He was Comte de St, Chapter 1, Mystic and Philosopher. He was perhaps one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, the friend of humanity, wishing for money only that he might give to the poor. Friend to animals. His heart was concerned only with the happiness of others. Mémoire de mon temps, Landgrave Charles Prince of Hesse, who was his personal friend. He did, indeed, we do know, Saint-Germain was a person of great wealth, although he, I think he understood that it was a good tactic to conceal the source of his wealth. But I don't know that he ever wished for money. He always had money, and he's known, we do know that he gave a lot of it away to the poor wherever he went. I think being a philanthropist is an automatic reflex if you're an aristocrat. If you're really of an aristocratic spirit, not in the same way that you know these nouveau riche Rockefeller types later on who did it in a very calculated way to sort of whitewash their image and to secure greater control over society. No, I think it was something that comes from the heart of a real aristocrat. There is a real sense of caring. During the last quarter of every 100 years of Madame Blavatsky, I think we can skip this. All right, jumping right in. Among the strange, mysterious beings with which the 18th century was so richly dowered, no one has commanded more universal comment and attention than the mystic who was known by the name of the Comte de St. Germain, a hero of romance, a charlatan, a swindler, an adventurer, rich and varied with the names that showered freely upon him, hated by the many, loved and reverenced by the few, should be revered, reverenced could be. Time has not yet lifted the veil which screened his true mission from the vulgar spectators of the period, or I think from any period since then. I think we're only now, I think, on the verge of perhaps of appreciating his mission, as we perhaps will begin to recognize that mission reflected in our own personal efforts and achievements and yearnings and ambitions, not for ourselves, but for the world. Then, as now, the occultist was dubbed charlatan by the ignorant. Not just ignorant, I think he was dubbed a charlatan by people who were trying to obstruct him. The dark forces that we were reading about in Transylvanian Sunrise. The very same. Only some men and women here and there realized the power of which he stood possessed. The friend and counselor of kings and princes, an enemy to ministers who were skilled in deception, he brought his great knowledge to help the West, to stave off in some small measure the storm clouds that were gathering so thickly around some nations. Alas, his words of warning fell on deafened ears, and his advice went all unheeded. Looking back from this distance of time, it will be of interest to many students of mysticism to trace the life, so far as it may yet be told, of this great occultist. Sketches are to be found here and there from various writers, mostly antagonistic, but no coherent, detailed account of his life has yet appeared. I think there have been some since then, even in the last 50 years or so. There's been some, I think I've come across a few. I just have to get my hands on them, and we have plenty of time. We can get into them all. Probably some pretty exciting stuff. This is very largely owing to the fact that the most interesting, important work done by Monsieur de Saint-Germain lies buried in the secret archives of many princely and noble families. Very likely. And one wonders how much of those secret archives have been opened generously by the descendants of those who had direct contact with Saint-Germain. With this fact, we have become acquainted during the careful investigations which we have been making on the subject. Where the archives are situated, we have also learned, but we have not yet, in all cases, received permission to make the necessary researches. It must be borne in mind that the Comte de St. alchemist and mystic, does not belong to the French family of Saint-Germain, from which descended Count Robert de Saint-Germain, blah, blah, blah. I don't think this is terribly important. Just keep it in mind, there was someone who people have conflated with Saint-Germain, and who fell into some amount of disgrace, and so this disgrace, she says, has often attributed to Saint-Germain the mystic, to whom we now turn our entire attention. Okay. That Monsieur de Saint-Germain had intimate relations with many high persons in various countries. That he did have intimate relations, interactions with many high persons in various countries is quite undeniable. The testimony on this point being overwhelming, that such relations should cause jealousy and unkindly speculation, and is unfortunately not rare in any century. Let us therefore see what some of these princely friends say. When questioned by the Herzog, it's like a duke, I think. It's a German word for a duke. Herzog Karl August, as to the supernatural age of this mystic, the Landgraf von Hessen-Philipps Barchfeld replied, "We cannot speak with certainty on that point. The fact is, the Count is acquainted with details about which only contemporaries of that period could give us information. It is now the fashion in Kassel to listen respectfully to his statements and not be astonished at anything. The Count is known not to be an importunate sycophant. He is a man of good society to whom all are pleased to attach themselves. He is at all events He at all events stands in close relation with many men of considerable importance and exercises an incomprehensible influence on others. My cousin, the Landgraf Karl von Hassen, is very much attached to him. They are eager Freemasons and work together at all sorts of hidden arts. He is supposed to have had intercourse with ghosts and supernatural beings who appear at his call. So here we see this mingling of the light and the dark, which perhaps could be symbolized by the checkerboard floor, the threshing floor that you see in Masonic imagery, the checkerboard pattern, the light and the dark. The incomprehensible influence, I think it's his incredible spirit and his cultivated vibrational field. Herr Mauvillon, in spite of his personal prejudice against Monsieur de Saint-Germain, is obliged to acknowledge the feeling of the Duke toward the great alchemist, for on his supposed death, being mentioned in the Brunswick paper of the period, wherein Monsieur de Saint-Germain was spoken of as, quote, a man of learning, a lover of truth, devoted to the good, and a hater of baseness and deception, the Duke himself wrote to the editor expressing his approbation of the announcement. I don't quite understand. In France, Monsieur de Saint-Germain appears to have been under the personal care and enjoying the affections of Louis XV. Okay, yes, this is definitely true. But approbation of the announcement, was he surprised? Then again, I don't know, you may not remember in a previous video I talked about the reasons for which many people at the time and now suspect that the announcement of his death was a kind of a feint. It was a fake death, and probably he pulled it off for political reasons. And some people say it was due to porphyria, which I'll get into another time. Apparently, like many aristocrats had porphyria, and one of the things that might occur would be to fall into an unconscious state that was very much like death, and that his body was then spirited away to Transylvania again, where he was revived. That is in some source elsewhere. We'll get into that. It's quite fascinating. So I don't know. I think it's very likely that his death was faked. I don't know about being spirited away to Transylvania and being revived by someone that I'll get into another time. Yes, his very close relationship with Louis XV is very well documented, who repeatedly declared that he would not tolerate any mockery of the Count, who was of high birth. So that's another theme that comes up, that the Count was often subject to mockery. Mockery is a terrible instrument in the hands of unscrupulous plotters and intriguers who wish to discredit you. They can find any number of ways to mock you for one reason or another, either because they're threatened or they feel that their duty to try to slow you down or stop you or invalidate you in some way. But certainly we see a host of comedians and other people who were... We see this in other places too. Others have said, I forbid any mockery of the Count. So perhaps there was something faintly ludicrous or over the top, or he must have been a bit eccentric on the surface. Which would be qualities that might spark amazement and wonderment and excitement and admiration in some people, and other people might, not know how to take it. and so be inclined to mock him. It was this minister, the Duc de Choiseul, to become bitter enemy of the mystic, although he was at one time friendly with him. Let me see, how are we on time? Oh, we're all right. The same writer, who later became one of his devoted students, testifies to the fact that Monsieur de Saint-Germain ate no meat, although in another source says that he ate the white meat of chicken occasionally, drank no wine, and lived according to a strict regime. Louis XV gave him a suite of rooms in the royal Chateau de Chambord, and he constantly spent whole evenings at Versailles with the king and the royal family. One of the chief difficulties we find in tracing his history consists in the constant changes of name and title, a proceeding which seems to have aroused much antagonism and no little doubt. This fact should not, however, have made the public of the period dislike him, for it appears to have been the practice of persons of position who did not wish to attract vulgar curiosity. Thus, for instance, we have the Duc de Medici traveling in the years 1698 and 1700 under the name of the Comte de St, the Graf Marcolini, when he went from Dresden to Leipzig to meet Monsieur Saint-Germain, adopted another name. The Kurprinz Friedrich Christian von Sachsen traveled in Italy from 1738 to 1740 under the name Comte Lausitz. Nearly all the members of the royal families in every country during the last century, and even in this, adopted the same practice. But when Monsieur Saint-Germain did so, we have all the small writers of that period and later calling him an adventurer and a charlatan for what appears to have been practically a custom of the time. And I think what is remarkable and interesting about the Count is that he apparently was, at least among the very high aristocrats of his day, he had a very high standing. But perhaps the way he conducted his activities, it left him open to those who doubted his equal standing to those monarchs and those at the very top. They doubted him. They doubted that he was considered an equal of those. So they probably insisted that his constant adoption of new names and identities was an indication that he was a charlatan, when in fact he was, as any of the very high-ranking noblemen or aristocrats, in need of some concealment at times. Let us now make a list of these names and titles, bearing in mind that they cover a period of time dating from 1710 to 1822. My goodness. The first date is mentioned in the Baron de Gleichen, who says, "I have heard Rameau, and as old relative of French ambassador at Venice, testify to having known Monsieur Saint-Germain in 1710, when he had the appearance of a man of 50 years of age." That's a bit difficult for me, because if we're to believe what most people have speculated, the best guess we have is that he was born in perhaps 1690. But then we have the story of him in 1710 appearing to be about 45 or 50. So there's a problem there, and I haven't found any satisfactory explanation. If he is indeed the son of Prince Rákóczi, he would only been 20 in 1710, as far as we know. The second date is mentioned by Madame d'Adhémar in her most interesting Souvenir sur Marie Antoinette. During this time, we have Monsieur de Saint-Germain as Marquis de Montferrat, Comte Bellemare of Weimar at Venice, Chevalier Schöning at Pisa, Chevalier Weldon at Milan and Leipzig, Comte Soltikoff at Genoa and Legor, Graf Zarogi at Dresden, and Comte de St. Germain at Paris, The Hague, London, and St. Petersburg. No doubt all these varied changes gave ample scope and much material for curious speculations. A few words may fitly here be said about his personal appearance and education. From one contemporary writer, we get the following sketch. He looked about 50, is neither stout nor thin, has a fine intellectual countenance, dresses very simply but with taste. He wears the finest diamonds on snuff-box, watch, and buckles. Much of the mystery with which he is surrounded is owing to his princely liberality. That is, he gave away a lot of wealth. He was always gifting people very expensive jewels, diamonds, artwork. Another writer who knew him when at Ansbach says, he always dined alone and very simply. His wants were extremely few. It was impossible while at Ansbach to persuade him to dine at the prince's table. Monsieur de St. Germain appears to have been very highly educated. According to Carl von Weber, he spoke French, English, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish very well, and French with a Piedmontese accent. It was almost universally accorded that he had a charming grace and courtliness of manner. He displayed, moreover, in society a great variety of gifts, played several musical instruments excellently, and sometimes showed faculties and powers which bordered on the mysterious and incomprehensible. For example, one day he had dictated to him the first 20 verses of a poem and wrote them simultaneously with both hands on 2 separate sheets of paper. No one present could distinguish one sheet from the other. In order to arrive at some orderly sequence, it will be well to divide our material into 3 parts. All right. There you see speculations about his parentage. Was he the son of the widow of Charles II, a Portuguese Jew, an Alsatian Jew, a tax gatherer at Rotondo, a king of Portugal, or Franz Leopold, Prince Rákóczi of Transylvania? This last seems to have been the correct view, according to the most reliable sources that have been found and other information to which we have access on this point. This theory is also held by Georg Hesekiel in his Abenteuerliche Gesellen 35, Berlin. I don't know what all this is. 1852, Carl von Weber also, also says that Monsieur de St. Germain openly appeared in Leipzig in 1777 as Prince Rákóczi, and that he was often known as the Graf Zarogi, which is simply an anagram for Rákóczi. This last fact we have verified in another interesting set of articles to which we shall refer later, written by a person who knew him at Ansbach under the name of Zarogi. Another writer remarks, his real origin would perhaps, if revealed, have compromised important persons. Undoubtedly. Not least of all himself, I'm sure. And this is the conclusion to which, after careful investigation, we have also come. We can get into this next time. But keep in mind that most people tend to converge around this conclusion that he was the son of Prince Rákóczi. And we get into that next time. And it's very plausible. But we do have this bit of a problem here with him appearing in Venice in 1710 and appearing to be about 45 years old. when if he had indeed been the youngest son of Prince Rákóczi, he would have only have been 20 at the time. So let's leave it there. We got through a lot. If you stuck with me for this entire video, that's incredible. Until next time.